Hi, good morning everybody. It's Bill Hogarth here again, Southend Evangelical Church, continuing our walk or wander, if you like, through some of the Messianic Psalms. And last night we studied the first part of Psalm 22. Done this in a very unusual way. We'll get onto that in a minute, but this is kind of the Rolls Royce of Messianic Psalms and prophecies concerning what happened at Calvary over 2,000 years ago. And this psalm, along with Isaiah 53, gives the greatest details, not only of what Jesus went through physically, but also, and more importantly, what he went through spiritually. But before we begin looking at this prophetic passage, I want to start with a passage about prophecy in general. Let's look at one passage where God declares how we can know that he is God. And the statement we're going to start with is in Isaiah chapter 41, verses 21 to 23. Present your case, says the Lord. Bring forth your strong reasons, says the King of Jacob. Let them bring forth and show us what will happen. Let them show the former things, what they were, that we may consider them and know the latter end of them, or declare to us things to come. Show the things that are to come hereafter, that we may know that you are gods. Yes, do good or do evil, that we may be dismayed and see it together. In the days of Isaiah, everyone had a god. See, this was sadly nothing new. Even in Israel, people worshipped gods from the neighbouring countries rather than their own God, Yahweh. We know that when they left Egypt, they took their own household gods with them, hid them in carts or in bags, and carried them with them. So they'd always been unfaithful to their own God. All the nations and all the inhabitants of the world were religious in that sense, but the question is, who was right? So the God of the Bible, our God, issues a challenge here to anyone who would claim to be a God. And it's a simple twofold challenge. The first thing is, tell us the former things. And the second part of the challenge is, tell us the things that are still to come. In other words, if you are the true God, the real God, you can tell us, or if you think you're worshipping the true God, you can tell us how this planet and life on this planet began. Man can't do that. Evolutionists can't do it. And what about what is still to come? If a so-called God is actually God, then he would know both. Now, a person may be able to make something up about how things began because we weren't there to verify it. But predicting what is to come is not so easy. Man-made future predictions are about as accurate as the weatherman who said, I'm 90% right 10% of the time. But the Bible is an incredible book because it's made up of around 30% prophecy of what is still to come, and that prophecy is 100% accurate. Our God knows the end from the beginning. When new news is revealed each day, God hasn't learned anything new. He knows it before it happens. If a new political party reveals some great new policy, God has still not learned anything new. Sometimes we're none the wiser either for that matter. Yet with Bible prophecy, we have recorded predictions made hundreds and even thousands of years before they came to pass. Yet they've been proven true. So we're going to look at one such chapter this evening. If we had a simple overview of Psalm 22, we could see that it's written by King David around 1000 BC. And yet it goes far, far beyond anything that happened to him. It has 31 verses. Half of those, almost half, have a direct reference and fulfillment recorded in the New Testament. It begins with, my God, why have you forsaken me? And ends in the original with the expression, it is finished. And if you know the words that Jesus spoke from the cross, then you will know that those are two of the most important statements that he made. The chapter describes in amazing detail the process and results of crucifixion 500 years before crucifixion was first introduced. or practiced. While it was popularised and perfected, if you could call it that, by the Roman Empire, the Encyclopaedia Britannica reports, the first historical record of crucifixion was about 519 BC, when Darius had 3,000 political opponents in Babylon crucified. Now the psalm itself can be split as follows. The first section is wrath from God. That's verses 1 to 6. The second section is wrath from man, anger from man, both verbal and physical. That's 7 to 21. And the third section is a blessing of God for the Messiah and for believers. That's verses 22, all the way to verse 31. We'll look at this psalm in the order of how it played out at Calvary. So we're not going to start in verse 1, we're going to start in verse 7. The anger, the wrath of man. David the psalmist wrote this: all those who see me ridicule me, they shoot out the lip, they shake their head, saying he trusted in the Lord, let him rescue him, let him deliver him, since he delights in him. But you are he who took me out of my mother's womb. You made me trust while on my mother's breast. I was cast upon you from birth, from my mother's womb you have been my God. Be not far from me, for trouble is near, for there is none to help. Leading up to this, Jesus had been arrested during the night before and had trials before the Jewish high priest and the Sanhedrin, Pontius Pilate and Herod Antipas. He'd been scourged, he has a mock purple robe put on with a crown of thorns, and is led away to be crucified. Whilst we were in Israel last year, my wife and I, we were in the excavation of the Antonia fortress, and there's evidence there that the Roman soldiers played a game called the Game of Kings. A board has been found scratched into the limestone pavement, the Gabbatha, where Jesus would have stood to be sentenced by Pilate. The game involved winning certain objects along the way: a robe, a crown, and a scepter. The winner was king for the day, and then he was put to death. Maybe, perhaps, this is what was happening to Jesus. So our passage begins with the wrath and the taunts of men. Jesus was put on the cross at about 9 o'clock in the morning. It says the third hour, and Jews always mark their days from 6 in the morning. And he was on the cross for just over 6 hours. Commentators split those hours between the wrath of man for the first 3, the wrath of God for the last 3, because of the great darkness that covered the whole land for those 3 hours. Verses 7 to 8 record basically word for word what is later stated in the Gospels concerning the mocking and the taunts from people when Jesus was on the cross. Matthew records it in his Gospel in chapter 27. Verse 39 says, and those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads and saying, you who destroy the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross. Likewise the chief priests also, mocking with the scribes and elders, said, he saved others, himself he cannot save. If he is the King of Israel, let him now come down from the cross, and we will believe in him. He trusted in God, let him deliver him now if he will have him. For he said, I am the Son of God. Even the robbers who were crucified with him reviled him with the same thing. Let's look at the group mocking Jesus. First of all, you've got the general masses, the kind of hoi polloi, the average Israelite passing by and just wanting to have a quick look at the latest crucifixion, see us up there, shaking their heads at him as if they are his superior, abusing him verbally. Human nature doesn't change much, Even now, in what we like to call our civilized world, there are parts of the world where people will still go to see executions. Then you've got the religious echelon, then you've got the chief priests, the scribes, the Pharisees, The elders, they still remember the day when Jesus rightfully pointed out in public that they were the blind leading the blind. I love this. He stood somewhere near the beautiful gate, looked out towards the Mount of Olives, which is covered in tombs, and called them whitewashed tombs. He also called them snakes and a brood of vipers. Jesus has been a thorn in their side for the last 3 years because of his miracles and his teaching. And it's strange to me that the Pharisees, who knew very well what the Messiah would do in order to prove who he was, could not see this in Jesus. The list of things Messiah was going to do was heal the sick, cure the lame, cleanse the leper, raise the dead. You know, the first leper that Jesus cleansed was the first leper to be healed since Naaman bathed in the Jordan at Elisha's prompting. The problem was that they were filled with jealousy, and they refused to believe that an untrained carpenter from Galilee could do these things. But they, who had years of training and had studied the Torah and the law all their lives, they couldn't do them. His teaching was different from that of the scribes and the Pharisees. Ask a Pharisee a question and he'll give you a point of law. Ask Jesus a question and he'll give you the answer in a parable or explain the law in a way people could understand. So they're enjoying this moment. And then you've got the criminals, the robbers, one on each side of Jesus, and both of them, at least at the beginning, are hurling insults at him. Thankfully, one turned. How would we have responded at such a time to all those insults? Maybe with a little spite and venom. Go take a running jump comes to mind. How did Jesus respond? Peter tells us in his first letter, 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 22, he says, who committed no sin nor was deceit found in his mouth, who, when he was reviled, did not revile in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but committed himself to him who judges righteously. And that's what we see in Psalm 22, that in the face of the insults, he reminds himself of how the Father has been there for him since he was a baby in the womb. He's trusted in God since being on his mother's breast, and God has always been his rock and his strength. Verses 12 and 13, David writes, many bulls have surrounded me, strong bulls of Bashan have encircled me. They gape at me with their mouths like a raging and roaring lion. In a later verse, he also adds that dogs have encircled me. So this psalm likens 3 groups of those around Jesus to 3 different animals: bulls, dogs, and lions. One Bible commentary says that Bashan, east of the Jordan, was known for its rich pasture land and for its strong, well-fattened cattle. Amos later referred to luxury-loving Israelites as cows of Bashan. So the reference is pointing to the rich, powerful religious leaders of Israel who lived off the fat of the land. Dogs is a well-known term for Gentiles and was used for Romans. In this case, the Roman soldiers and the centurion who carried out the crucifixion. And the lion, of course, is a metaphor that's used for Satan. So this reference may be speaking spiritually of the warfare, the circling that's going on in the demonic realm, as Peter describes him, a lion looking to kill, to steal and to destroy. So here the groups are circling religion, the world, Satan. And it's worth noting that these 3 are persecuting Christians with greater urgency and in greater numbers today than ever before. And as a passing comment, we should note that persecution will come to the West. We should never think that we are immune. There's a physical aspect of man's persecution. Verses 14 to 19, David writes this, I am poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart is like wax, it has melted within me. My strength is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue clings to my jaws. You have brought me to the dust of death. For dogs have surrounded me, the congregation of the wicked has enclosed me. They pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. They look and they stare at me. They divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. But you, O Lord, do not be far from me. O my strength, hasten to help me. Let's remember that this is describing crucifixion in detail 500 years before it would be invented. 900 years before 900 years before it was invented, 500 years before Romans began using it, and 1,000 years before Jesus would be crucified. This was not a Jewish method of capital punishment. The Jews had their own method. They preferred stoning. And the psalmist is describing something completely foreign and alien to Jews. In view of this, we can examine the description of the crucifixion given here. I am poured out like water. Jesus is at the point of complete and utter exhaustion. He has nothing left. His life has been poured out through the hot sun and the agony of continually trying to lift himself up to breathe. Death by crucifixion usually came from suffocation, because the position of the body stops the person from being able to breathe. Add to that the pain in the feet when trying to stand and the pain in the arms when sinking down again, and you have an extremely cruel death. The next thing he says is, all my bones are out of joint. Ever dislocated a bone? I have. I've dislocated a shoulder, torn ligaments in my back. Those ligaments are like strong elastic bands that hold our joints in place. But when they're stretched too far or break, the bone is forced out of its joint. It's released. You can only imagine the intense pressure on the bones and joints and ligaments as the victim hung from the cross. My heart has turned to wax. Under immense shock and sustained pressure, Jesus' heart, is giving way. My strength is dried up like a potsherd. Extreme dehydration is setting in. He compares himself to a piece of broken pottery, a clay vessel completely dried out by the furnace of God, physically and spiritually. It was at this point that Jesus said, I thirst. They pierced my hands and my feet, writes David. That, of course, is exactly what a crucifixion does. The nails holding the victim to the cross are driven through the wrist area normally and through the feet. The word pierced is an important word. It's the first of three highly significant prophetic scriptures using it. This one in Psalm 22 describes the actual physical act of crucifixion. They pierced my hands and my feet. The second describes why in Isaiah 53 verse 5, a very well-known verse to most Christians, which says, but he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement for our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. The third passage is found in Zechariah and describes a coming day when the nation of Israel's eyes will be opened and they will see what they did. Zechariah 12 verse 10. And I will pour on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem the spirit of grace and supplication. They will look on me whom they pierced. Yes, they will mourn for him as one mourns for his only son, and grieve for him as one grieves for a firstborn. The psalmist says, I can count all my bones. We don't like to think of this, but it's likely that, as with most victims who were crucified by Romans, Jesus was naked. All his bones were visible, and as his bones were out of joint, they would have been prominent. But in fulfillment of another psalm, Psalm 34, not one of his bones was broken. So when the soldiers came to break the legs of the victims to bring about a quicker death, because the victim then wasn't able to push himself up to breathe, they found that Jesus had already died, and they didn't break his legs. And all the while that this was happening, in Jerusalem, in the city, houses over there were preparing their Passover lamb. The pilgrims who were on the Mount of Olives were preparing their Passover lambs in strict adherence to the biblical command that, among other things, that lamb should not have any broken bones. Exodus 12 and verse 46 tells us, in one house it shall be eaten. You shall not carry any of the flesh outside the house, nor shall you break one of its bones. They were carrying out that command, and yet they were willfully blind to the fact that the real Passover lamb was being sacrificed at that same time upon a cross. Finally, they divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. This is exactly what the Roman soldiers did. All four gospel writers record this act. And John writes in John chapter 19, verse 23 and 24, he says, Then the soldiers, when they had crucified Jesus, took his garments and made four parts, to each soldier a part, and also the tunic. The tunic was without seam and was woven from the top in one piece. They said therefore among themselves, Let us not tear it, but cast lots for it, whose it shall be. That the scripture might be fulfilled, which says, They divided my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. Therefore the soldiers did these things. We're only halfway through this psalm. We'll be studying the second part as a group next Wednesday evening, thanks to modern technology and Zoom. And I will post this again on Thursday, the second part. Thank you for joining with us. Be blessed, stay safe, and enjoy. Just enjoy life as it is. In Jesus' name, amen.